So Lilo and Stitch is the new remake from Disney, and it's coming out right after Snow White, the remake that totally bombed. This movie, just to say the least, is actually doing really well. It grossed more than Tom Cruise's Mission Impossible movie in its weekend. They came out the same weekend, counter-programming. The last Mission Impossible movie actually did really poorly because of Barbie and Oppenheimer. Now, what if it fails due to Stitch? That would be funny, but I don't think that's the case. Lilo and Stitch is a really iconic Disney franchise. It started as kind of this scruffy outlier, this last of the Disney animated films. This was like post Toy Story when the studios were still making animated films but were experimenting with CG. Lilo and Stitch started as this movie that kind of they didn't think would be huge, but it ended up being a smash success. Follows a little girl, Lilo, who lives with her sister in Hawaii, and she befriends a cute little, I always thought he was a koala, but in the movie they call him a dog, a cute little alien named Stitch who crash lands on Earth and the mishaps and adventures they get into. Now, I'll be very straight with you guys. I did not think this was a great film at all. I thought this was a really bad movie, but that doesn't mean that I couldn't enjoy it. I had a lot of fun watching this movie. I went to see this movie and I went with my friend and we both really liked this. She was a huge fan of Lilo and Stitch as a kid, and she absolutely loved it. For her, this hit all the beats on the head. It was a lot of fun. It was sweet. It was beautiful. For me, though, I could really see the flaws, especially when it comes to remaking a movie. There's nothing inherently wrong with remaking a movie if you're giving it a new lens or a new voice or doing something different. But this really tries to capture all the charm of the original, and it definitely works for little kids. I'm sure, little kids, or if you really love this movie and you have nostalgia, it'll work, for you. For me, it was fun to watch. I just enjoyed watching the movie, but it really seemed to fall short in many of the things that a live action movie should do when remaking a movie, which is adding a new style to it. This movie looks not that great. It's much more ugly than the animated movie to begin with. It has to sacrifice a lot of character, and it has to make choices that kind of benefits this new story it's telling, where in this movie they add a subplot about Lilo's sister going to college, which is really a great thing, trying to kind of, modernize it and make it work. This happened with Snow White, where it just didn't work. At least here, the effort is kind of noble, and I kind of like where they're going. I feel like with Snow White, there's so much you have to kind of correct with a movie written in the 30s that it never really translated well. Lilo and Stitch is just messy, though, because of all the changes they make, trying to make this work in live action. They remove Captain Gantu, which in my opinion is not a huge change. It's not like this Gantu guy is like a massive villain or one of the all-time, big Disney villains. But in kind of reducing the conflict, they make Jumba, who's one of Stitch's creator, the villain of this movie, but he never feels like a villain. The conflict there and thus making Jumba the enemy at the end, it just doesn't work. It feels very artificial and light, and it just doesn't work as a movie because of that. The live action creatures look really bad, also because they're animated technically. But I think the live action Stiff himself actually works really well in this live action remake. The animators did make the smart choice to avoid trying to make him realistic in the way Beauty and the Beast or The Lion King tried and failed to do. They kept the big cartoon eyes and they didn't get too hung up on physics or realism, which lets him stay wild, animated, and fun to watch. The real problem is everything else, especially the live action parts. A common argument is that Lilo and Stitch makes sense for a remake because most of the characters are human anyway, with just, one alien thrown in. And it sounds reasonable until you remember cartoon humans and real humans aren't interchangeable. There's a reason Homer Simpson and Al Bundy feel completely different, or why Johnny Bravo doesn't hit the same as Austin Butler. Animation allows for a different kind of performance and energy that live action just can't replicate. The original Lilo and Stitch used that freedom of animation well. In this version, it becomes obvious how much harder it is to film with real kids, especially opposite CG characters. And that's not a knock on Maya Kealoha, who plays Lilo. She's actually great. But there are very real, very strict limitations on how much you can work a child actor. And you feel it. These rules exist for a reason. Lilo is barely around at times, and that limits the heart of the film. You can tell the filmmakers were boxed in by those restrictions. It's also just very hard to kind of make a human character have that same energy with Stitch, or this fake, cartoon character. And I don't think, again, that's a knock on the actress. I think this actress, she's a kid, really does a great job. Because putting a kid in any movie, I'm just impressed by the performance she gave. But it's very hard to generate that same feeling you get when watching the animated film, and it just shows. And like most of these Disney remakes, this one suffers from just being too long. The original was tight, about 80 minutes, and this version stretches toward about 2 hours, which means they had to invent a bunch of new stuff just to fill time, and it shows. Like, combining kind of the character of Cobra Bubbles with the social worker, they try to make it like feel more real or add more of a real modern angle, and it just drags the movie out. Like the Lion King remakes dragged out scenes or the random subplots in the new Beauty and the Beast, the content always feels tacked on. But in Lilo and Stitch, that problem hits harder because none of the added material really connects with what made the original special. It slows everything down and delays what we're all really here to see, Lilo and Stitch together. And the scenes with them are shot like a commercial. I don't really need it to look like insanely great, but it just looks very flat. Where the animated movie has this very beautiful and unique style you just can't replicate here. Then there's the more abstract issue. The original felt like a bit of a misfit in the Disney lineup. It had some bite, felt quirky, and came out during a time when Disney was in a bit of a slump. It wasn't polished like the Disney Renaissance films. It had attitude. It wasn't radical, but it stood out. Now, decades later, Stitch is part of the brand. He's no longer that scrappy outsider. He's a marketable icon. The story no longer feels rebellious or risky. It feels corporate. You can see that shift all over this remake. Gone is the subtle critique of tourism in Hawaii. Authority figures are treated with more respect than they ever were in the original. The rough edges are completely gone. Lilo and Stitch was always Disney, yes, but it at least pretended to have a bit of an edge. Now it's been sanded down and sanitized. Little kids are gonna like this movie, and I personally, again, thought it was fine, but I do want to see more. I don't think thinking, oh, this was a cute remake is enough. It really needs to have more bite, and even if it includes all the favorite things in the original, it needs to add this newer style that's going to make the movie stand out.